The rebels thought the valley was theirs. They thought the early light and the morning wind would carry them straight to the forward post. But they didn't see the glint, just once, high in the ridge. They didn't know a man was already watching, breathing slow, finger resting on a trigger that could change everything. Sergeant Cole wiped the condensation off his optics with the back of his glove. The chill was already fading, replaced by the kind of dry heat that made sweat evaporate before it formed. His forward observation post sat like a scar on the edge of the valley, 2 sandbag walls, a camo net draped over rusted rebar, and a radio humming with static. He scanned the hills again. At first, there was nothing, just low brush, dust-colored rock, and the shimmer of distant heat. Then he saw it. Not movement, not in shape, just a ripple, wrong against the rhythm of the wind. He froze. His gut told him what it was, rebels testing the approach. Up in the high ground, Corporal Hayes lay prone in a shallow scrape he'd carved out 2 nights ago. The rifle, an M40A5 he'd carried through 2 deployments, rested perfectly still on its bipod. The hills gave him a field of fire that could rake every path leading to Cole's post. He'd been there since midnight, barely shifting, letting his heart beat slow until the reticle in his scope seemed to float in place. Through the glass, Hayes watched the lead rebel crouch low behind a boulder, speaking into a handheld radio. 2 others moved behind him carrying RPG tubes. Rookie mistake, Hayes thought. Put all your eggs in one basket. Cole's voice crackled in his earpiece. Anything up there? Got eyes on your visitors, cutting their comms now. Hayes took in a slow breath. The crosshairs settled just beneath the man's cheekbone, the spot that would drop him instantly without so much as a twitch. The suppressed rifle bucked gently, a muted crack, swallowed by the wind. The man went down like a marionette with cut strings. Confusion rippled through the rebels. Hayes didn't fire again. Not yet. He knew the best weapon right now was doubt. The survivors scanned the ridge, waving wildly, some pointing toward Cole's position. That was good. Let them guess wrong. Cole caught the movement too. They're spooked, Kim, he said. They're blind, Hayes replied. Won't last long. More coming from the creek, bed east. Cole ducked behind the wall, peering through a loophole toward the dry creek. Sure enough, a column of rebels was moving in low, their bodies broken by shadows in the ditch. His own men were just 4 strong, barely enough to hold the post if the enemy came in full force. But they didn't need to hold, just by Hayes, time to bleed them out. Mortar tubes prepped? Cole asked. Private Landry, sweating under his helmet, nodded. Pre-registered coordinates set. Stand by my mark. Hayes tracked the flanking element. They thought the creek bed shielded them. It didn't. From his angle, he could see every head, every weapon, every mistake. He marked the lead man, a PKM gunner, and waited until they bunched up behind him. Another breath, another squeeze. The PKM dropped, its barrel clanging against the rocks. Chaos again. The men behind tried to grab the weapon, but Hayes' next shot hit the man's shoulder, spinning him sideways into the ditch wall. Cole heard the shouts, even from his position. He raised a hand toward Landry. Fire for effect. The mortar thumped. A moment later, a round exploded ahead of the rebels, showering them with rock and dust. Hayes used the chaos to shift fire, targeting anyone who tried to crawl forward. Cole's gunners let off controlled bursts, just enough to sound like more rifles than they really had. For 20 minutes, the pattern held. Rebels would test a path, Hayes would cut down the point man, Cole's squad would hammer the rest into cover. Each failed push cost them time and bodies. Hayes' rifle never faltered. Every shot was deliberate, each one breaking the spine of the attack before it could reach striking distance. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the ground before the post was littered with bodies and abandoned weapons. Cole's men hadn't taken a single casualty. And still, Hayes hadn't moved from his hide. From the rebel side, it must have felt like fighting ghosts, one moment charging, the next watching men fall without knowing why. That was the point. Fear was a force multiplier, and today it was entirely on Cole's side. Hayes keyed his mic. "They're falling back." Cole smiled grimly. "Copy that? Ridge is yours, Hayes." In the hills, Hayes blinked away the sting of sweat in his eyes. The rifle stayed steady. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for today, in this valley, the post still stood. The valley was still, almost eerily so, but Hayes knew better. The first kill had rattled the rebels, yet they were regrouping faster than most green militias did. Cole's post couldn't afford for them to regain momentum. Hayes shifted slightly in his hide, adjusting his position by less than an inch. Through his scope, the dust shimmer began to resolve into movement. A pair of fighters dragging the fallen radio operators set toward cover. Their voices carried faintly on the wind, urgent and clipped. If they succeeded in re-establishing comms, the valley would flood with more rebels before noon. Hayes's thumb eased the safety forward. He calculated distance, factoring the slight crosswind sweeping down from the northern ridge. The glass reticle floated over the nearer fighter's head. Breath in, breath out, squeeze. The man dropped instantly, his hand still clutching the radio strap. The second fighter froze, eyes darting toward the source of the shot. Hayes shifted to his partner, fired again. The radio clattered to the dirt, antenna bent. "Comms down," Hayes reported. "Good," Cole replied. "That just bought us another hour." Down below, the rebels spread out, fanning into the rocky gullies. Hayes knew the pattern. Without a central command channel, they'd rely on visual signals and squad leaders yelling orders. Slower, sloppier, easier to dismantle. Cole's binoculars caught the first sign of that sloppiness. A heavy weapons team hauling an RPG to the creek bed, unaware they'd been seen. He passed the coordinates to Hayes, who already had the men in his crosshairs. The shot took the spotter first, stripped the shooter of his guide, and the weapon became nearly useless. Hayes's second round cracked into the RPG tube itself, punching through the casing. The weapon tumbled, bouncing in the dirt before one of Cole's riflemen finished the survivors with a quick burst. Still, the rebels weren't breaking. They were probing, learning, and trying new approaches. Hayes respected that. It meant the next move would be more dangerous. Then he saw it. A flicker of light on the far ridge. His blood chilled. That was no accident. The enemy had just put their own sniper into play. Cole's voice came low over the net. "They're splitting, east and west flanks. Looks like they're going to try to squeeze us." "Copy," Hayes said. "I'll watch east. You keep your eyes on the west." From his vantage, Hayes saw the eastern force moving in pairs, using the dry creek bed as concealment. They kept low, disciplined, almost certainly led by someone with real combat experience. This wasn't a mob rush anymore, it was a methodical pincer. Hayes marked the lead pair and tracked them, but this time he didn't shoot immediately. Instead, he radioed the firing adjustments to Landry on the mortar, giving precise windage and range. "On my mark," Hayes said. The rebels hit a choke point between two boulders. Perfect. "Mark!" The mortar thumped, the round bursting in a tight plume of dust and rock right in front of the lead pair. As they recoiled, Hayes picked them off in sequence, head then chest, before they could recover. The rest scattered, diving into side gullies. Hayes shifted fire to those who broke toward higher ground. One shot, another. Each man fell before he could crest the lip of the creek. Meanwhile, Cole's team engaged the western flank. Overlapping arcs of rifle fire kept the enemy pinned, but the pressure was rising. Hayes heard the sharp rattle of incoming rounds snapping past Cole's position, closer than before. "Hayes," Cole called, "you're about to get company on that ridge. They're trying to flank you." "Let 'em try," Hayes muttered, already sighting in on the shadow climbing toward him. Hayes switched to controlled pairs, conserving ammunition. The rebels on his ridge were climbing fast, but they had to cross an open slope before reaching his hide. He fired once, dropping the first climber mid-stride. The others froze, returning wild, inaccurate shots. Hayes stayed, flat, using the silence between their volleys to reacquire targets. Each return shot from him was surgical, each kill clean. Below, Cole orchestrated a deception. Instead of firing in full auto panic, his men delivered short, deliberate bursts, making it seem like more rifles were in the fight than reality allowed. The rebels hesitated, unsure if they faced 4 defenders or 40. "Hayes, keep thinning them," Cole ordered. "We just need to stall until they commit to one side." Hayes obliged, targeting RPG carriers and machine gunners first, stripping the enemy of their heaviest firepower. Every few minutes, Cole's mortars would land a shell to keep the pressure up. But Hayes knew this rhythm wouldn't last. The rebels were adapting. He spotted one group setting up improvised smoke canisters, an attempt to blind him from the ridge. He adjusted his position, ready for the shift in visibility. The next move would decide whether the post held or got overrun. The hiss of burning canisters reached Hayes' ears before the smoke fully bloomed. Gray plumes began to swell across the valley floor, rolling upward with the breeze. From the ridge, the effect was disorienting. Targets flickered in and out, silhouettes morphing in the haze. Hayes adjusted his breathing. He'd trained for this: wind estimation, target acquisition by movement rather than shape. Through his scope, he searched for irregularities: the sway of a barrel, the bend of knees mid-step, the slight jerk of someone hauling weight. A shadow emerged, hunched low and steady, too steady for a civilian. Hayes held a fraction high, allowing for the wind to push his round in the smoky air. The shot cracked, and the figure folded, the weapon clattering on the rocks. Cole's voice cut in. "Smoke's pushing toward us. We'll lose sight in a minute." "Copy. Keep your men low and listen for my call-outs," Hayes replied. Through the shifting veil, another crew set up a PKM machine gun. Hayes didn't have a perfect shot, but he didn't need one. He aimed for the gunner's torso and fired. The man crumpled over the weapon, pinning it useless under his body. The smoke began to thicken, but Hayes noticed something else: movement at the far edge of the haze, higher up the slope. He realized with a tight knot in his gut that this wasn't just a smoke screen to blind him. It was cover for their counter-sniper to get into position. The first round from the enemy sniper missed by inches, striking the rock face beside Hayes and showering him with grit. The sound was distinct, a supersonic crack, followed by the dull report of a rifle echoing from the opposite ridge. Hayes slid back into cover, controlling his breathing. This wasn't a rebel recruit with a lucky shot. This was a trained shooter. The enemy had finally recognized that as long as Hayes was alive, their attack would keep bleeding out before it reached Cole's post. "Cole," Hayes said over the net, "I've got counter-sniper activity, opposite ridge, high ground." "Copy. Do you need suppression?" "Negative. That'll just give him my exact range. I'll handle it." Hayes began a slow crawl backward, belly pressed to the stone, until he could use the terrain to mask his movement. Every shift of his body was deliberate, no sudden angles, no unnecessary profile against the skyline. A second shot whined overhead, even closer this time. The rebel sniper had his range, but not his lead time. Hayes knew he had to relocate before the third shot corrected both. He slid into a narrow defile, knees and elbows scraping rock, and began a painstaking lateral move toward an alternate firing point he'd marked earlier in the operation. Sweat dripped into his eyes, and the smell of the smoke drifting up from below mixed with the metallic tang of blood from his scraped forearm. This was the kind of duel he'd trained for, and if he won it, the valley would be his again. As Hayes moved into his new hide, his mind flashed back to the mountain warfare school in Vermont. Snow-covered ridges, instructors barking corrections, the slow patient crawl toward a target that could end you in a heartbeat. He remembered the first time he'd faced a live counter-sniper exercise, how the key wasn't speed, but silence and misdirection. Those lessons came alive now. He reached his alternate position, a wedge of rock that concealed his body while giving him a slit view of the opposite ridge. He scanned slowly, letting the world move in his scope. There, a faint glint just above a scrub bush, the kind of mistake only fatigue causes. Hayes didn't fire immediately. Instead, he adjusted for distance, humidity, and the slight mirage in the air between them. His finger curled around the trigger. The shot broke clean. The glint disappeared. Through the scope, Hayes saw a figure slump sideways, rifle sliding from lifeless hands. He exhaled, the tension draining from his shoulders. "Counter-sniper neutralized," he reported. Cole's relief was audible. "Then let's finish this." With the ridge secure, Hayes could return to his role. Ghost in the hills, cutting down any rebel foolish enough to think the smoke would save them. The attack's momentum was faltering, and the kill zone Cole had set up was about to come into play. Cole crouched behind the sandbag wall, glancing at his watch. The rebels had lost their sniper, their comms, and half their heavy weapons. It was time to draw them in. "Hayes, we're baiting them toward the east approach. You've got Overwatch?" "Already dialed in," Hayes replied. The east approach was more than it appeared, a natural funnel between two ridges with claymore mines buried along its choke points and pre-registered mortar coordinates locked in. Cole signaled his men to fire sporadic, inaccurate bursts down the western slope, making it look like their attention was fixed elsewhere. The rebels took the bait. Hayes watched as a force of about 20 fighters crept into the eastern approach, eyes fixed on Cole's post. From above, they were clear in his scope, clusters of movement against pale rock. The first claymore detonated with a concussive roar, flinging dirt and bodies into the air. The survivors scattered, but Hayes was already on them, dropping anyone who moved toward cover. Cole's mortars pounded the back end of the funnel, boxing them in. By the time the firing stopped, the choke point was a graveyard. The rebels who could still move were pinned against the rocks, unable to advance or retreat without stepping into Hayes's crosshairs. The trap had closed, and the outcome was inevitable. The sudden silence after the firefight was broken by a single voice shouting orders in a language Hayes didn't recognize. From his scope, he saw a figure emerge, a tall man with a red scarf around his neck, holding an AK above his head. He wasn't surrendering. He was rallying. Cole recognized him immediately. That's their leader. If he gets in, they'll push through no matter the losses. "Not today," Hayes said, adjusting his elevation. The leader broke into a charge, sprinting straight for the perimeter, a dozen rebels following behind him. Hayes tracked him carefully. Too many moving bodies, too much dust. He waited until the man crossed the halfway point to the post. Hayes shifted to a rare high-angle shot, aiming just forward of the leader's path to account for speed. The round struck center mass, snapping the man backward as if pulled by a wire. He hit the dirt hard, the red scarf falling into the dust. The charge collapsed instantly. Some rebels dove for cover, others simply turned and ran. Without their leader, the will to fight dissolved. Cole's men fired a few controlled bursts to speed the retreat, but the battle was already over. In the aftermath, the only sound was the wind dragging smoke out of the valley. Hayes scanned the slopes one last time through his scope. No movement, no heat shimmer that wasn't natural. Cole's squad moved cautiously out from behind the sandbags, weapons at the ready. They passed the bodies of men who had been sure they would take the post, now lying face down in the dust. Abandoned rifles, RPG tubes, and broken radios littered the ground. Hayes stayed in his perch until Cole confirmed the field was secure. Then, like a shadow melting back into the hills, he descended the ridge. When he emerged near the post, his face was streaked with dust and sweat, but his eyes were calm, steady. Cole met him with a nod. You kept us alive today." Hayes just shrugged. "They never saw me. That's the point." The rebels had learned something dangerous, that the hills were never empty, that even in silence they could be watched, measured, and cut down before they knew they were in a fight. The valley was quiet now, but everyone at the post knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Cole gathered his squad inside the post's makeshift command corner, just a folding table under the camo net, maps pinned down with empty ammo boxes. The smell of spent gunpowder lingered in the air. "Inventory weapons, ammo, and rations. Recover anything off the enemy that's useful," he ordered. Hayes, still silent from the ridge work, joined the sweep. They moved methodically through the field, tagging bodies for intel retrieval. One rebel carried a folded paper map marked with supply routes. Another had a notebook filled with names, possibly collaborators in nearby villages. Every piece would be sent up the chain. Cole's radio buzzed with higher command. The voice on the other end was dry and detached, asking for casualty numbers, ammunition expended, and confirmation that the post remained operational. Cole gave the facts, stripped of the hours of tension, the counter-sniper duel, the trap. To headquarters, it would read like a standard defensive action. When the call ended, Hayes handed over a dog-eared photograph he'd found on a fallen rebel. 2 children smiling, dressed in threadbare clothes. Neither man spoke. In war, you learn to process those images without letting them eat you alive, but they still stayed with you. Back at base 2 days later, Cole typed up the official contact report. The language was clipped, clinical. Enemy force size estimated at 40 to 50. Engagement lasted approximately 2 hours. No friendly casualties. The enemy retreated in disarray. He knew the officers reading it would glance at the numbers, nod, and file it away. They wouldn't feel the shift in the wind before a sniper's round cut the air. They wouldn't smell the smoke curling up from burning canisters. They wouldn't hear the sharp metallic snap of a PKM jamming under suppressive fire. Hayes skimmed the report and gave a small shrug. "Guess that's how it goes. They'll never know how close it was." Cole agreed. The truth of the fight, the calculated risks, the shots taken in seconds that decided who lived and died, would live only in the memories of the men who were there. And even those would fade under the next fight and the one after that. That night, Hayes sat on his cot, rifle cleaned and stored. In front of him lay a blank sheet of paper. He began to write, not to a commander or a friend, but to the parents of Corporal Reeves, a young soldier who'd been killed on a patrol the month before. He told them the truth, the kind no official letter carried. He told them Reeves' laugh could cut through even the heaviest firefight, that his steady hands had kept mortars on target in the worst conditions. And he told them that every shot Hayes had taken in the valley was in part for Reeves, to make sure another name didn't have to be written on another letter. The words came slowly, but they came. When Hayes sealed the envelope, he felt a small shift in the weight on his chest. In a war that blurred days together, small acts like this kept humanity from burning away completely. In the days after the fight, Cole's squad began hearing whispers from the nearby village. Traders passing through spoke of the ghost in the hills, a silent protector who ended rebel raids before they began. It wasn't superstition. More than once, villagers had watched from a distance as rebel patrols approached the post, only to turn back in confusion, leaving their dead behind. They didn't know Hayes's name or the exact ridge he favored, but they knew the myth. Somewhere above the valley, unseen eyes waited, and a single shot could decide your fate. Cole didn't confirm or deny the stories when asked. In truth, he liked them. Let the rebels wonder if the hills themselves were watching. Fear was as good a weapon as any rifle in the armory. One evening, as the sun dropped and the desert air cooled, Hayes sat cleaning his rifle. He could hear the distant laughter of children in the village below. Maybe the stories kept those kids alive too. The valley stayed quiet for a week, but no one at the post believed it would last. Cole had seen this rhythm before: loss, regroup, revenge. Hayes prepped for the inevitable. He shifted hides to keep the enemy guessing, set new ranging markers, and ran dry drills until every motion felt like muscle memory. This time, if the rebels came back, they'd be smarter, harder, more determined. Cole reinforced the perimeter, laid new mines, and resupplied the mortars. The squad rotated through night watches with double the vigilance. The hills no longer felt like open ground. They felt like a chessboard. Every ridge and gully a potential line of attack. One dawn, as Hayes checked his scope against the horizon, Cole joined him. "They'll be back," Cole said quietly. Hayes didn't look away from the glass. "And when they do, there won't be a first warning shot this time." The wind shifted in the valley, carrying the faint echo of movement far away. Neither man smiled. The game was about to begin again. War doesn't always announce itself in waves of tanks or skies full of aircraft. Sometimes it lives in the space between breaths, in the glass circle of a rifle scope, in the steady hands of a man who waits. The rebels never saw Hayes. They never knew his name. To them, he was just a whisper of death in the wind, the reason their leaders fell mid-sentence, the reason their charges broke before they began. But to Cole's squad, he was something else. He was the margin between survival and a folded flag sent home. Every careful shot, every reposition in the dust and rock was a thread holding the post together. Without him, the rebels would have crossed that valley, stormed the walls, and painted the sand red. In the official record, it was nothing more than a successful defensive engagement, just another entry in the long ledger of this war. But the men who were there knew it was more, a moment when skill, patience, and sheer willpower held back the tide. Hayes never asked for credit. He didn't need it. He measured his success in the men who went to sleep that night still breathing, in the quiet laughter drifting up from the village, in the silence of the valley after the last shot was fired. Because in war, the loudest victories are often built by those who remain unseen. And as long as the hills had a guardian, the post, and the lives it protected would stand.